Firstly, we want to thank everyone for joining us today. And before we jump into the discussion, we want to do a quick poll to discover how many of our audience members today have a community ambassador program in place. So take a quick minute to answer our poll here, and we will comment. Okay, so it looks like about, 68% of us don't have a community ambassador program and about 30% do. So that's a very interesting mix. And we'll definitely get into all aspects of an ambassador program today, from if you're just getting started to how do you really continue to engage and develop a more mature ambassador program. Now, I think it's time for us to introduce ourselves. My name is Lucia Monzo, and I manage business development and strategy here at Hivebrite. And I have the pleasure of being joined by Sarah and Tessa today. Quick intros: Sarah Rapp is the Director of Alumni and People Engagement at JA Worldwide, one of the world's largest youth-serving NGOs, which was recently just nominated for a Global Peace Prize. Go Sarah and JA. We're so excited to have you here and thankful to have you as one of our clients. Tessa Kriesel is Head of Platform Developer Relations at Snap. She takes pride in engaging with her community as a contributor and mentor, and has done this for several companies, ranging from startups to tech giants. And as a technologist, her goal is to elevate developers' voices and knowledge in the community. Thank you so much, Tessa, for joining us, and we look forward to all the expertise you're going to bring us today. Excellent. Now, with intros out of the way, let's get our discussion started. And for everyone who's joined us, please be aware that if you have any questions throughout the webinar, please use the Q&A box, and we're going to do our best to answer those live at the end of the webinar. So don't hesitate. Please do share those. Excellent. So the first question that's going to kick it off is going to go to Sarah today. And we'd like for you to share a little bit more about how you actually define a community ambassador program. What does it even mean? And why is it critical to JA's worldwide community mission?
Thank you, Sia, for the great intro. I'm excited to see so many small, tiny humans in Zoom. Thanks for showing up to virtual things. I know everyone wants to see each other in person, but we are grateful to have you here. And thanks also for your interest in our community. And I, as Lucia mentioned, work for JA Worldwide, and I'm actually also JA alumna. So what does that even mean? So let me give you a quick intro on what JA is, because we're a very, very big and global organization. So as you can see on the slide here, we have more than 12.5 million student experiences. So student experience is anything from our day programs up to our flagship program called JA Company Program, which I participated in 13 years ago back in school, where you actually create your own startup in school. So you create a product or a service, and then you actually sell it. Yes, JA is aka Junior Achievement, correct. I saw the chat right now. So in there, you create your own startup. So it's very much hands-on learning, and the students in our flagship program really learn things you usually don't necessarily learn in a normal curriculum in school. We have, as you can see, more than 80,000 schools involved, a lot of volunteers, contact hours, and staff members. So if you go to the next slide, I'll show you a bit more. So as mentioned, we were nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize, obviously not myself, and not only JA Worldwide, but the entire JA community. We are in more than 115 countries, and so many of our offices do incredible work. And we are in really tough places like Venezuela, like Iraq, Iran, right? Like in places where people are not as privileged as we are. I'm based in Austria right now. We're also part of the top 10 NGOs and nominated by the NGO Advisor. And as you can see, long story short, we have a lot of alumni. We have a lot of people, a lot of students, and we have very different ambassador programs because we really want to ensure that the students keep engaged with JA afterwards, not only because they are the best brand ambassadors, but also we want to give them more opportunities to learn, to grow their leadership skills, And I will talk a bit more on like how we engage them, but we have two big buckets. One is for sure on the local level, right? Like in the countries, really develop leadership skills on the local. And now we started another big project called Youth Advisors, which is more global facing. But I think for now, that's all. Intro and JA. If you have any more questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. I know it's a big organization, so there might be a lot of questions.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And we're going to definitely dive into more strategy in just a minute. But before we do, I want to hand it to Tessa, because I'd also love to learn, Tessa, about how you think about ambassador programs, and perhaps feel free to share some that you've worked on, and tell us how you're collaborating with ambassadors.
Yeah, definitely. Ambassador program is actually the first time that I developed one or created one. It was very much from scratch. I had no idea what I was doing. It was probably about 5 years ago or so. And I was working with developers. And so I have my niche in community has always been in the developer space. And so I started pulling this program together as a developer myself. And I was like, okay, what would I want if I was going to support a company? We just had this like immense group of people who would say how much they loved us, how much they adored us, how much they really enjoyed the product, how much they enjoyed our team, like what we did. And we weren't leveraging those folks in any way. And I was like, hey, they're like preaching like all of our praises. Like we got to bring them in and like,
right.
and leverage this, right? And so built up a program essentially. And it was just a very like customized ambassador program to like what our audience needed. And at the end of the day, it just, to me, an ambassador is someone who like really truly like likes your brand. They have an affinity for your product, for what you're doing, for your team, some level of passion. And they want to like instill that passion. And so it's a really great opportunity to be able to leverage them to kind of help your business move forward, not in a selfish way by any means, right? But in a way that like builds up both of you. And there's just so many opportunities to say, hey, do you want to do this speaking gig? Like we're sponsoring an event, but like nobody wants to see all of our faces all the time. How can we elevate some of those that are not only our customers, but also folks that are like our ambassadors and that are out there advocating for us?
I love some of those points, Tessa. I think you hit on three or four things that I constantly see. One is building that genuine relationship with those who have an enthusiasm for the community, those who are aligned in terms of the missions and the ambitions that both the community have and that they have, and then ways in which really you can empower those individuals to continue to contribute, give them ways to act as leaders, as really subject matter experts in programs. So let's dig into a little bit more of those programs and those structures and how actually they get formed. So Sarah, maybe you want to, I know that you're working with a very large and global community. It'd be really interesting to hear how you've structured your program and sort of the best experiences, best practices that you've seen work well.
Yeah, totally. So for everyone who thinks, oh my God, there's so many people, so it's easier to form a community, right? Honestly, like everyone starts really small, just because, as you can see, we have giant student numbers. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're actually engaged afterwards. I'm sure everyone knows that, but I really want to make this clear that like, it's not as easy as it sounds on the slide, right? Because we have a lot of student engagement. However, what we are focusing on as JA Worldwide specifically is not necessarily the student communities, because they're aged between like, let's say 16 to 25 probably, or even younger depending on the programs. What we really build up is an alumni network. So every single student who goes through the program is pretty much an ambassador of JA. Some of them are more active, some of them are less active, but we really create this alumni network. And how we as JA see alumni networks is really from alumni for alumni, right? Yes, we do have our locations around the world, which is amazing, and they do incredible work on the ground, really making sure that especially also underserved youth around the world gets the voice at the table, gets the skills they need to actually accelerate. And as you can see in our brand new logo, it's a flock of birds. So it's kind of one, the small symbols are called birds. So the one on the top is kind of the one student. And what we say with JA, we also have some research and studies on this. One JA student will affect and influence 5 more people while they travel through their own journey. So this is kind of how we believe in, and this is why we really want to empower the students afterwards to take the lead as ambassadors. So how we do this, we are a very federated model. So we have JA Worldwide as like the head organization, and then we have like kind of the regional operating centers, and below we also have the regions, the countries, sorry. So we created something called J Alumni Leaders, and they're focusing on their countries. So we have it in, let's say, Sweden, Zimbabwe, Singapore, like everywhere around the world. And what we encourage here is really to create a team of like 1 to 3 people, and we call them alumni fire starters. So what that means is they're very excited about all things JA, about entrepreneurship, about keeping the momentum going, and also especially about giving back, right? So these 3 people, they work together with our JA location to really hone in on like, okay, what is the need on the location? As you can imagine, every single country is different, every single operation is different, but they are really there to first support back the program. So what they do is they go back as mentors or as volunteers into the schools. So you can imagine an 18-year-old person teaching a marketing class for a startup because they've just been through it the year before. So who gives an 18-year-old person the stage to actually give a marketing course? Because all the corporates and also NGOs in the world are like, nope, you need to study to actually talk about this topic. And honestly, this is the power of JA and the alumni network, because our students, they go through at a very early age through topics other students don't go through because it's not in the curriculum. So they obviously have other skills, and they love to kind of show it and like make sure to move it forward. So one piece is, as I mentioned, the giving back part, right? The second piece is especially also creating their own events. So here you can see on the slide, we had a alumni, if you go one slide back, so sorry. We had the Global Alumni Conference for the first time in 2019. And every year we have other alumni conferences. One is coming up in France actually this year, where we bring in 200 in person. And this is really to create the buzz and the excitement and like keep the whole learning thing. And we obviously organize all of that on Hivebrite. This is why we're also here. We are very excited that Hivebrite can actually give us the functionality of having multiple people manage their own groups in whatever own way with different rights. So we're very happy that we're on Hivebrite, because this is kind of our hub where we create all the things which then lead to offline activities. I'm not sure if you want me, Lucia, to also talk about the second piece, or you want to ask some follow-up questions here.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to quickly, in terms of the discussion of empowerment, recognition, this is a lot of what you're doing here in your community ambassador program to keep individuals incentivized. Obviously, they genuinely already have such a wonderful connection to the organization, but that continuous engagement and ability to provide them with empowerment so that they can take control and ownership of their own sub-communities, their own members. I think those are some of the really wonderful ways to incentivize and keep ambassadors engaged over time. And I think at this point, if I'm not mistaken, we wanted to do another poll because we wanted to engage with the audience and see how are those of you in the audience incentivizing your own ambassador. So we want to ask you, we want to hear from you. Are there anything in specific that you're doing with your ambassadors today? Access to exclusive swag, anything in specific? So it looks like, oh, it's coming in. It looks like across the board, there's quite a few of us doing a variety of things, from unique access to industry leaders, goodies, badges, exclusive content, discounts. So a lot of really wonderful incentives in the programs. I want to turn it to Tess really quickly to ask, since I know, Tess, you've worked with, I would say, developers mostly in communities. Are you seeing something similar in terms of how you're nurturing and incentivizing those ambassadors?
Yeah, that's a super great question. I think in general, like, as humans, we just want to feel appreciated, right? And so there's a lot of things that we can do in general to just show that level of appreciation. But I think that when it comes to developers, the one thing that's different is that they're not as motivated by money as other folks. And I think that we are blessed in that space where I think folks who land in kind of that technology career end up having a fairly nice compensation. And so you have to get creative, because sometimes it can't be like, oh, I'm going to send you the latest AirPods, right? They're like, oh yeah, I got 3 pairs because people are hitting me up for free AirPods to have sales meetings. So you have to get really creative about how you think about that. And I just saw that there's a chat thing. I will definitely speak to like the open source thing, Giovanna also. And so I think there's a few different things to kind of touch on here, like routine communications and making yourself known to those people is incredibly valuable. So as I've started building programs, sometimes there's like one voice that leads that program. And then sometimes you start to bring in other folks, whether they're ambassadors themselves, like what Sarah's doing, where they're kind of, those leaders that are leading those different areas, or if you have additional folks that come to the team. And so we try to do a lot of different touch points with them. And so that looks like a variety of different things, right? And so it can be like one-to-one conversations, like, hey, just checking in, how are you doing? Like, what are you up to? And we would probably do those on a monthly to bi-monthly basis, just depending on, the number of folks in the program and how active someone is. And then as well as I was actually in the open source community with one of the first programs that I created, so I can speak to that. When you're in the open source space, it's really, it's easy, but not always easy, right? It can be easy to get to know that community and start to build relationships and bonds with them. And so what we would do is we try to be present wherever our ambassadors were present, right? And so we'd go to a lot of conferences back then, that was a few years ago, or we'd go to their meetups that they were hosting. We'd attend some of the other localized things, as well as virtual events and conversations, to just like show our support and to be there. And so we do like dinners or happy hours, or like go to like arcade bars and like have some fun. But I think definitely that communication and that like one-to-one, both FaceTime in person and also virtually, is really important. I think coming to like what we did with the poll, right, is like a lot of that like swag appreciation stuff. For me, that was a lot of like, what are they motivated by? And so I actually pulled together developer personas based on motivation. And so they're slightly different than like Jane Doe and like Bob Ryan, they do these things. Mine are focused on like what actually motivates them. And so when I think about what motivates them, that usually trickles down into what that kind of swag or what that kind of appreciation looks like. If they really care about building their network, expanding their job, expanding their career, then I'll give them thought leadership opportunities. I'll do network introductions, things like that, that I know is going to help advance them. Where if there's someone else who like loves swag or just loves goodies, loves appreciation, words of affirmation, they just really love our products, then I'll give them access to the product, swag, company branded swag. They really like that stuff when they're that close to the product. And then I had one other thing I was going to just say. Oh, one thing that I learned that was really valuable is I started this and that survey. I'm sure all of us have seen some version of it. It's like, do you like coffee or hot cocoa? Do you like chocolate or vanilla? Like these this and that kind of questions. I actually pulled together about 25 questions of this and that. And it gave me a lot of insights into them. I asked a lot of the same questions like mountains or beach, or Marvel or DC, right? We had like a superheroes kind of themed in one of the programs I did. And so when you actually get to know some of those like really just off the wall, like this or that answers, you can actually curate really great gifts from that. So giving like hot chocolate instead of like coffee, or, being able to like customize some of those thank yous was really valuable. And then, yeah, just bringing folks together, right? So just like what Sarah's sharing, I think like bringing those folks together in opportunities, giving them continuing education, providing resources to allow them to be stronger leaders, are all things that I think are incredibly valuable too. So lots I could share here, but I think I'll cap it at those little tidbits.
Thank you, Tessa. Those are incredible tidbits. And I love the fact that you've created those unique personas for those ambassadors, and we're getting super granular and focused. I think that's something just generally in community. There's so much we can give, we can talk about. And I always love to, have these debates of how do you start, small, focused, and then expand, right? This is just in every community. So that way you're really hitting the value drivers for those particular members. And in the ambassadors case, they too have their own personas and particular values. So how do you kind of hit those and keep them incentivized through what really motivates them? And I love that this or that you had mentioned. And I know, Sarah, that as a part of JA's ambassador programs, you really put a lot of thought into this focus and into the personas of ambassadors. You have really specific ways that you do this. I'd love to hear a bit more and have you share if you'd be open to it.
Oh, for sure. So I just want to quickly add two things to Tessa's speech. I 100% agree on all things you said. And I also love, especially to like ask the people. Yes, 100%. Like you have to ask the people, because there's something, for me, it was when we built out the global alumni network, just to give you a brief background. So I participate myself, and then I was active in the German alumni network for years. That was all voluntary. Then I was leading the European alumni network, also all voluntary. So I have been with the community for over I'd say like 8 years before I actually started working on it. So obviously my perspective was very different because I knew from like the alumni perspective, hey, this is what people kind of want. But obviously then jumping in, and I'm sure all of you who are in the webinar right now, there's a lot of stakeholder management all the time of people wanting a lot of things. And then you're like, okay, the hardest part is obviously to focus. And honestly, what we've also learned is, I had to learn as well, less is actually more, because there are a million opportunities out there in the world, especially right now in the virtual world. It feels like everyone is just bombarding everyone with the best opportunity out there on the planet, right? So you kind of like, again, the best opportunity on the planet. I thought I saw this like 2 seconds ago on Instagram. So what we really focused on, and then I'm happy to share a bit more in detail what we did, is like less campaigns, less benefits. I'm sure like everyone will scream. I was like, no, we need more and we need to engage the people more. But actually what we now focus on especially the global level, right, is like less but big opportunities, right? We, for example, have just one campaign with 2-minute drill, which is actually an Apple TV show, which is amazing, right? So it's like a big, massive thing, but we focus on that. And then once that is done, we focus on the next one, right? So just for everyone like who's in this, like we have to do more. Sometimes actually that's very harmful because people won't respond because there's just too much noise going around all the time. And so one specific thing I really want to share with you as well is, beside the JA alumni leaders, which are really focused on their countries, really getting those leadership skills and building up the networks from the ground, we now started this year something called the Youth Advisors. And Kat, not sure if you want to share this slide. So essentially what that is, it's kind of a youth voices sounding board for JA, because we have so many great alumni, and you can see 9 of them here. They were actually our facilitators. So what we put together is 130 JA alumni, and we actually talk to them, not the survey, no any, like questions and multiple choice. It was an actual interview, which you can imagine was a bit tricky with 130 people, but we had like smaller group interviews. And here we took again the approach from alumni by alumni. So our facilitators were the people on the slide here. So they were alumni who are also very young, and they interviewed the students and alumni right now. And what we did, we had like a set of questions. And the cool thing about this campaign is this directly informs or like helps our board of governors to take decisions for the strategic planning of JA for the next 3 years. This will be like our youth voices for the impact. So we use this one campaign, and this will be, all the interviews will be transcribed and go through AI. Actually, we're collaborating, a big shout out with Cortico and MIT, who are helping us with this. So we have a transcript of all the interviews, and we will have an interactive landing page, which is coming out in June. So check out our social media channels. It's pretty cool because you can actually click on the voice and then listen to what they said. So for the alumni, this is ambassador program, which didn't take a lot of their time, but it was very quality time because we actually listened to them on like, hey, how was your experience with A? How do you want to change the world? What did you learn? And now we're taking this and actually making this more broadly. So you can see it's very different approaches to ambassador programs because the community is very broad. And lessons learned from this one, again, less is more. So it's easier to find 130 people for a 1-hour interview than finding like 5 people to be involved like all year long for like 10 hours a week, right? So trying to find the short but quality approach is kind of also where we're going.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sarah. I really appreciate that story. And I love how we're continuing to emphasize some of these same themes over here, which there's kind of the less is more, staying focused, really understanding those personas. I see in the chat, there's so much wonderful chat. Thank you so much for all the engagement, audience members in the chat today. It's wonderful. There's a couple of people are commenting on the diversity of the programming, the diversity of those in the community. It's so wonderful. And I think inherently, especially here at Hivebrite, right, our mission, we're here to try to help community, empower those communities, help them thrive, maximize their impact. And we really do believe that communities inspire growth and change. And within that, naturally, there is diversity and a diverse set of voices. I would assume, Tessa, it's funny, one would think you're very global community. So there's going to inherently be a lot of diversity and voices and inclusive and a lot of different types of culture. So it'd be wonderful to spend maybe a minute or two on diversity and inclusion and communities and how you see it as a part of your organization? Is it something that you have specific goals around, and or is it something that's natural? We'd love to spend maybe a minute or two talking about it. It's so important, especially today.
Yes, absolutely. I think there's a lot that you can do to really focus in on that, especially like when you think of things from like where you're geographically located, right? There might be, I'm in the US, and so I've been a part of a lot of communities that are very US centric, and it's very easy to see kind of similar faces, similar types of people, and not really think about what that actually means for that community. But diversity is so incredibly important. And I think all of us probably feel really, really, really strongly on this topic. I know I personally do. I have a major passion for diversity and inclusion. But I think it really like boils down to like trying to spread out, right? Whether it be geographically, whether it be, you know, whatever focuses you've got inside of your community. And I think what's really actually the most important part about driving a diverse and inclusive community is that inclusive side of it, right? When you bring someone in who might be different or look different or feel different or have different values than maybe some of who they're seeing around themselves, it's just making sure that they feel welcome, making sure that they feel known, making sure that you've got accommodations for those folks, whether it be on a dietary, right? Sarah, you and I were just chatting about like the dietary, sorry, I guess actually I was chatting with the host, my apologies. We were chatting about a wedding, right? And like having to be able to pull together meals and make sure that folks feel welcome, right? And so it's just all of that, of like thinking about those tiny, tiny, tiny little details of what makes somebody feel like they are welcome and included inside of a community. And I think that that is a very important part of like community period, let alone when you start getting into ambassadors, it's incredibly important to really truly value like all the differences across the board. So yeah, Sarah, love that.
Yes, yeah. And I really do believe this. Communities are places where people feel that safety, that purpose, that belonging. I could definitely see this in the program, Sarah, that you're building out, the program that you just spoke of. How does JA think about diversity and inclusion, especially since you're touching so many lives?
I mean, there's like, we should do a whole other webinar. We also joked in the pre-call that we need a whole other webinar for this one. To be honest, I think being diverse is not that hard anymore in today's world, right? Like people hire people from everywhere in the world. You have access to people through social media, all parts of the world. And I 1000% agree with you, Tessa. It's the inclusion, which is the hard part, right? Like everyone puts out, oh, we're so diverse. And then they have pictures of diverse people, but like how inclusive are you actually at the end of the day, right? Because if you're just diverse, that doesn't help anyone, right? It's great. But then if people don't feel belonging and like feel the safe space, what you just said, Lucia, then it's really useless. So in terms of diversity, JA is in 115 countries. So that comes naturally, right? Like we're a very diverse organization because we're sitting in so many countries. And then the whole inclusion part is actually where also I'm very personal, like very passionate about. And actually when I started JA, I also try to figure out how to be global, to be honest, because I'm like, how do you work cross culture? Like, how do I make them feel that they belong? Especially also because I'm coming from a very privileged background, right? Like I know the European way of things, but I don't know anything about like Venezuela or Singapore or Zimbabwe or what kind of challenges they go through. So actually, I created also my own podcast to really figure that out and really feed that into the JA community to learn from others on how to do that. But what we're really trying to do, especially at JA, not only for alumni, but all over JA, we have a free, flexible, and freestyle model, right? This is really brought up by our CEO, Ashish Advani, who's, you know, the most amazing CEO. Shout out to Ashish. And he brought up this, like, there's some elements which are fixed in an organization, right? You can't, like, we just have to have a fixed set of things which need to be done, right? It could be with members, it could be with like the logo, whatever, right? Then there are some flexible elements which kind of can be adapted, but have to follow a certain area so we can kind of see what they are. And then there's freestyle. And I think this is where the whole inclusion element comes in, because people can freestyle at JA and people can freestyle also in our ambassador programs, and everyone just does whatever feels right for them, whatever works on the ground, whatever is going on there. So I love this kind of categories because we adapted that to alumni. And yes, certain things just have to be done, even though we might not like them sometimes. But then adding this freestyle element where everyone can feel, oh, this is what we need. Like, you know, taglines can be in Spanish. This can be in whatever other language. they can do meetups offline or online and whatever. So this is kind of like the approach we take to especially inclusion. And we're working especially on JWillowIt now, even more focused, me together with another colleague, on really bringing this like people engagement into like the global level.
Amazing. And you're right, both of you. I think we could spend a whole hour probably just dedicated to this topic and the topic of inclusion. But some of this too, I think, leads really nicely into our next question. And thank you so much, Sarah, for also sharing that framework. It's the first time I've had heard it, and I really think it's fabulous. I'm gonna take it. And here you were talking about engagement. We're talking about ambassadors. I'd love to spend a little bit of time. I'm seeing some questions come in on this too, around the kind of measurement for engagement, either for ambassadors or those communities as a whole. Moving, it could also be a part of the inclusivity topic, but just generally as well, when we're thinking about the measurement for ambassador programs. Is this something that you particularly have laid out? How does that integrate into your overall programming for the community and for other major goals that you might have? Maybe I'll start with you, Sarah, and then I'll also go to Tessa and learn a little bit more how you're doing it there.
Yeah, totally. Also, impact is a whole other webinar.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm like, so many follow-up webinars. Yes, we do have a JA. Obviously, it's it's important for everyone to like actually make the impact like somewhere on a screen visible for like multiple stakeholders to like, okay, so what impact do we actually have? And of course, because we don't produce products, right? It's a bit harder to like see, okay, we had X amount of things and this was sold, whatever, right? So I'm always joking that like we as alumni, because obviously I'm one myself, we're the product of JA, right? So this is why things like the youth voices are so important, because this is like, we are the real products of JA. So what we especially have in the alumni network, I can share some, we now track like how many volunteering hours the alumni are giving back, because you have to imagine in our ambassador programs, the alumni usually between like 16 and 25, what I mentioned, right? So they don't necessarily have the big money to like donate back. They for sure, a lot of them are funders themselves. And whenever they, climb up the career ladder, a lot of them also want to give back financially, but this is not the initial goal because they're like just coming out of the program. So what they have is a lot of enthusiasm, they want to learn, and they have more time than other people who really dedicate to JA. So one is how many volunteering hours they actually contribute back to JA, but also to their very own activities, right? Then of course, we also kind of track the impact on like how many workshops they are giving, how many mentorship classes they are doing, and how many schools they're representing, how many schools they actually bring back into the JA network. So this is kind of just some numbers from the alumni side. And when we talk about JA in general, about all the programs where students go through, we now actually have a very new categorization, which is Inspire, Prepare, and Succeed. So Inspire is kind of like one-day programs, webinars where people get inspired to hear about JA, right? So you are welcome. You're now an inspired experience because you heard about JA.
Thank you.
Then we have kind of Prepared, which are a bit longer programs where we actually prepare students for wherever they go to next. And then Succeed is the category where alumni belongs to, where the JA company program goes in. So the very long experiences people go through with JA. And then of course, underneath those, and I'm happy to, like, if anyone is interested, I'll check with our team how much you can actually share. You can go to the website. We have a whole impact page there. With all the tracking mechanisms. And what we do at JWell, like, we kind of have a system, an internal one, where every single location actually adds their numbers, right? The numbers, student experiences, all of that. So that's kind of now a whole big thing, which is launched very newly, which is pretty cool. So everyone has the same data, the same visual look. But the most important thing, which we always talk about, is also the stories behind the impact, right? Because they're humans. So it's so powerful to hear. And this is why actually every single community company should have an ambassador program, because this is what touches people, what touches the funders. Everyone needs funding, right? Like, everyone's looking for the next funder. And like, these personal stories where we actually change lives is what brings in the people to then actually feel belong to the organization.
Absolutely. Yeah. And something, we had touched upon this in the webinar I was just in yesterday, is that when people feel that genuine connection, that's when people because as you mentioned, there's so many places that we can give, either give our time or donate. But when you really have that connection, that's where you kind of go back and you say, yeah, absolutely, I want to give. Absolutely, I want to donate. Or absolutely, I won't even think about changing my product because, okay, maybe there's a bug here, but I love the people who I get to connect with in this community. I feel so close to them. I'd love to learn more, Tessa, in terms of on the developer communities that you've worked with. How do you think about that impact and measurement as well? Are there certain metrics that you're thinking about? Is it also this kind of qualitative plus quantitative approach where there's art and science to it?
Yes, definitely. I think the one thing about developers, like coming back around to like them being a little bit different, is that they are not as approachable as like, I don't want to say the common human, but like as a other type of a person, right? They're very kind of off in their clicks and they're very niche. They want to talk to their peers. They want to talk to other technical people like them, but they tend to kind of want to push away those folks that they don't feel like they can relate to. And I think sometimes we can all relate to that, right? We want to hang out with our people. And so with developers, like building those touch points are incredibly important. And so sometimes you can actually have a touch point with a developer 3 to 4 times before they'll actually come around and be like, okay, now I want to hear what you're up to. What are you doing? And so I've worked mostly with product and service companies in facilitating these types of programs. So there's always a revenue element that they can report back to. There's also usually a product element. And so when I think about ambassador programs, I actually really think about like the goals of the company. Like what is the company trying to achieve? What is specifically the DevRel or the community team trying to achieve? And how can we echo what we need to achieve through our ambassadors? And so a lot of times it's like improvements made to products that ambassadors impacted, like actually getting into product ambassadors, right? Like folks that are leveraging the product at roadmap reviews, providing feedback on what we build in the roadmap, providing those kind of impactful ideas. And we all know that our communities contribute that. But when you can get in that ambassador who's like in that NDA, right? And they're really deep in the weeds with the product team, it can be incredibly impactful. I think another side of it that can be really impactful is also like on the awareness side, right? So when you're thinking about these kinds of folks and these kinds of programs, so slightly different than like, Sarah's program, but like driving awareness of that product or service or whatever company I'm working with can be really hard in that developer audience. And so when you can get their peers to talk about how great you are or how much they love the product or how much they love what you're doing or your brand or what have you, then it can kind of be what I like to call is like an echo for the program, right? So it's like we have something that we're all trying to achieve at a company and at a community and a DevRel level, but those ambassadors can go and like echo that even further, right? And be kind of that intensive audience. And so lots of different metrics that I track there. It's like level of engagement, right? Are they out into the world engaging in different places? And goodness, that can get tricky. Like trying to figure out, like, are they on Reddit? Are they on Stack Overflow? Are they on Twitter? Like, where are they hanging out? And so social listening is incredibly important for that. So I've got really robust social listening that I like to do and then make sure I can tag that out and provide insights into like what an ambassador is accomplishing through that. And then as well, right, product improvement, things you can actually get down to like, was there revenue driven? Was there new customers that came from product features that were added? And then of course, like the revenue and just acquisition in general. And so much more to break down from that. But again, it really comes back to like, what is your company goals and what are you trying to accomplish? And how do those ambassadors like feed and contribute to that?
Absolutely. And thank you so much for sharing that. I love this concept of the echo chamber, where really they're acting as that kind of voice that has reverberations across the community, across the organization, across social media, but really making sure that there's alignment on the stakeholders, alignment on the community management team, alignment with the ambassadors. So love all of these concepts. And it's funny because I think some of these concepts go right into some questions that are being asked. So I want to maybe hit some of those questions as well. We have more questions, but maybe I do want to make sure we save time for questions that are coming in. At this moment, if anyone has questions for Tess or Sarah, please be sure to put them in the Q&A box because we're going to start answering a few, and hopefully we'll get to everyone's question today. But just since we had hit on this topic a minute ago, Tessa, I'd love for us to hit this question first in terms of this echo chamber that also reverberates across public social channels as well, and how that feeds into the community. It sounds like you're doing some social listening. We have a question from Mike about what social media platforms are used to communicate with your ambassadors, if any, and how do you integrate those into your programs and structure? So not sure if you want to kick it off, and then I saw also, Sarah, you nodding your head too, so definitely want to hit on both of you. So Tessa, maybe kick it off, and we'll ask Sarah as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So Mike, specifically, like thinking back to like those developer personas that I shared, I think defining and making sure you have personas for like what your community and ambassadors look like in terms of like, who are they? What do they care about? Because you're going to get some insights out of that. Like one of the things I really recommend is like figuring out where they spend time. And so that's a matter of like, where are they spending time? For developers, a few, right? Stack Overflow, Reddit, Twitter, not so much LinkedIn, sometimes LinkedIn, TikTok, some of those other places like Twitch, and then specifically developer communities, right? And so some of those have a great way to integrate with them, right? Like Twitter is pretty easy to be like, okay, let's set up some social listening and let's listen here. There are some great products that'll, tap into like Stack Overflow and Reddit and things like that. But I think in general, it's really a matter of like getting really creative. Sometimes there isn't a way to go track a Discord community to see like what your ambassador is doing in a very like behind the scenes community. But I think getting as creative as you can and really like spending that extra time to like get to know where they're at and like where they are. Guess that's kind of the same thing, where they are and like how they're engaging, right? And so social listening, number one, is something I strongly recommend. I think number two is like community tracking and insights, like any type of tooling that you can get there. Specifically, anything that's going to share like, here is a member within my community, and here are the different kind of touch points that they've touched on in the integrations that you have set forward. I'm going to look at the question again just to make sure I'm not completely rambling. And then in terms of like communication, yeah, like it isn't always easy to communicate, like say on Twitter, because it's like there's a wall behind that, right? Like how do you start a DM with someone who doesn't want to accept DMs? And so I think like being really casual, but being really smart about it, like making sure that you're doing research, capturing insights on this particular individual. And then if you feel comfortable, like, tweeting directly to them or reaching out to them in a message through, like a Discord community or Stack Overflow or what have you. But I found that there's very like tricky techniques to like learn about the person first, then kind of figure out like where their preferred like medium is, right? Try to engage them there and then kind of build up that relationship from there. If they're an ambassador, you already have that relationship. And so ideally you're already able to like either email them or have a one-to-one call with them. And so just being open about how they can get in touch with you, I think is probably the most important, is like, do you have office hours? Do you have a Calendly? Do you have a way that folks can book time with you? And I think that's really important for ambassadors specifically.
Thank you, Tessa. Sarah, would you echo some of these items from Tessa? How do you communicate with your ambassadors through a variety of social means?
Yeah, totally. So here we go, global again. It's all of the social media channels and WhatsApp and all the other things. So the challenging part is what Tessa also said, is like you have to find them, right? You need to know where they're kind of hanging out. So that's why we as Hivebrite decided, as much as we would love that every single person would be on our Hivebrite platform, which is called Gather 24/7, and they would engage there as much as everyone does on Instagram, that's not the reality, right? So, and this is also not the expectation. What we did is we wanted to create one platform where we can hub everything, right? So every opportunity, every event, everything related to alumni is hub there. Of course, it's shared on social media, right? Like we talk about it on social media all the time, but people always have to come back there. And then slowly, this is how you obviously build the engagement. And then people are like, oh, actually, if I need a person, let me check out Gather, which is our platform first, because they're much more responsive than if you DM a random person on, Twitter or somewhere else on LinkedIn. And I think one thing which you just said in the end, Tessa, is so important. You have to let the people know that they actually can be an ambassador, right? Like if they don't know, like how would you know, for example? Like, so great example is also for the UN, they had a campaign called Equal Everywhere. And I felt like, oh, I feel so strongly about this. And then there was like an open call, like, hey, you want to be ambassador? And I'm like, sure. But I would have never personally reached out to the UN and be like, hello, I'm Sarah and I'm going to be your, you know what I mean? So really make sure that you openly communicate that you welcome people from the outside, no matter what capacity they have, whatever. So this is really what I see a lot around the world, where people are like, yeah, but we don't have ambassadors. I'm like, well, did you tell them that they can actually be one? And they're like, oh, Well, that's a good point. We didn't. So, right, start with yourself and actually publishing campaigns, open call to action to make sure that people know that you're looking for someone. And that really brings you far, even though it sounds so simple, but so many people don't even do that in the first place.
Yeah. And I want to just echo some of these points because really wonderful. One is definitely, you'll never know if you never ask. So make sure you're listening, understanding what the needs are and asking, because people might not know until they understand there's opportunity. The other is I have seen across so many of our own clients the wonderful integration between the private space of a community that might be behind, let's say, a gate, like your Hivebrite Gather community, and your social tools where it's a public community. So in your private community, that's where you can really foster that safety, that purpose, the belonging, the bringing together of all those collateral, the assets, the events, that engagement. But that doesn't mean you don't cross utilize and fertilize all of the public channels as well to help with the adoption of the community, the engagement with the community. I saw a community a couple of months back, really a lot of their members, young members, really avid TikTok users, and they would actually create challenges once a month where they'd also have TikTok videos, and they would actually drive this engagement that would go back and forth between their private and their public kind of communities, which was really wonderful. So I think that that's something to keep in mind, that it isn't an if this then that or exclusive. It's actually an integration between those kind of private and public spaces, which is wonderful. And I see another question here with regards to tools. One was, what platforms are you using for community? That's coming from Colin. I know that we touched on a few platforms. I'm not sure if we want to spend another minute or two. If there's anything in specific, Sarah, that you want to spend a minute or two talking about in terms of the platform. Obviously, you're using Hivebrite. Is there anything in specific that you want to mention? And also with regards to analytics, things like that, feel free.
Yeah, totally. So I think there's never a perfect platform. Let's just say that from the get-go. As much as we would all love this like one solution and then like actually building it ourselves. So from my perspective, don't try to build it yourself because it's going to cost more. It's going to, your energy is not going to be there ever. So this is, and we did a lot of research, obviously, because we have such a large group and so many different requirements. So really make sure that you have a very specific requirement list. So, I mean, people at Hivebrite will laugh. We had like a full flashed out Excel with different tabs because we knew that all these questions will come from the community, right? So make sure you know what you actually specifically need. And then, of course, you need to match like the nice to have and the budget. That's always the problem, right? So you want to have all these things and then mark the nice to haves, which you can cross out in the budget and in the conversations. But to be honest, our community lives on Hivebrite, and we're very happy because also Hivebrite always develops, and Hivebrite didn't pay me to say this now, right? So this is genuine feedback. Kind of always develops further, which we as a client always kind of benefit from, right? We have our wish list for Hivebrite, but then other clients do too. And Hivebrite really listens to the feedback, and then we're like, oh great, this is something actually we're looking for. And then also, honestly, other times there is stuff which we would definitely need, which is just not there, which is also totally fine, because at the end of the day, it's always a compromise, and we always work together. So make sure to really think through what the most important things are, and then you can decide, okay, I can create a group on Facebook. That's maybe enough for your ambassador program. Or if you want to invest more, you can go to a platform like Hivebrite, which is obviously much more expensive than a Facebook group, but also has many, many more functionalities. So it really depends on your needs, right?
Thanks, Sarah. And thanks for the shout out. Tessa, what types of platforms do you frequently see utilize in terms of working with developers in your world?
Yeah, I think it's really similar. Like there are, a lot of different like platforms out in the world that, do different things. And I think it really, like Sarah said, I cannot echo enough. It like comes down to what you need. Like what, different features are you working with? I think with ambassadors, it's actually really great to like have a way to like pull them into a private space. So really thinking about like access management, and the feature set that you can get within the access management, I think is really important. When you are working with developers, like I am like, will preach it from like wherever that like ambassador programs are the way to go, just because of the necessary touch points to like finally build that trust with them. And so I think it's really important to, you know, leverage platforms that can integrate with the places that you're spending time, but that can also do some of the things that you need. I'm trying to think if there's like specific feature sets. It really just kind of comes down to like what your community desires, right? And so I think having a really strong community strategy when you're getting going in your community is like a really good pillar to figuring out what that tooling can look like. And I think the more that you can integrate that into the developer's world, whether it be the product experience, whether it be, you know, actual like external, you know, places like Stack Overflow, GitHub, things like that, are really impactful. But at the end of the day, it's like making sure that you can do what you need to do, especially with your ambassadors, if you're going to build one of those types of programs.
Thanks, Tessa. And I do want to take it back to the ambassadors now for a couple minutes, as I see there's a couple questions that are coming in specifically to structuring an ambassador program that I'd love to get to. So I'm going to maybe also combine two questions here, because I think they one from Colleen and one from Mike. Colleen is asking about setting expectations or an agreement with ambassadors. And Mike asks if you revalidate those ambassadors on a yearly basis with an expiration date. I think those two things come together in my mind, because one's about, okay, is there an agreement in place for how long and how often do you reevaluate? So it might be interesting to hear how you've done that structure in your ambassador programs in the past. So I'll start maybe with Tessa and then go to Sarah.
Yeah, I think I had passively mentioned it earlier, but like NDA, I think is really important when you bring an ambassador in, because I think not only does that like protect your company and allow your legal department to be like, okay, we can tell them stuff, right? And like sometimes that is definitely a blocker when you want to bring them into certain things. I don't know if you two have heard of it, but there's a book called Superfans, and it's by Pat Flynn. I strongly recommend it. And there's a part in Superfans where he's talking about what Hershey's did, where they like opened up their factory and they let people come in, and all of a sudden it was like this huge like affinity for Hershey, right? Because they're like, I can see what they're doing behind the scenes, and this is so cool. And so I think when you can get down to that point where you can let them in, right? Open the doors for them and let them see things that others don't get to see. It not only like helps them feel special, right? But they're a part of their extended like, you know, company family or team family, right? And so I think like bringing them into that NDA is valuable. In terms of like an expiration or having like a contract, I think that kind of defeats the like natural trust building that you're trying to do in an ambassador program. There might be programs that need that, right? Where it's like maybe you're doing something that is very special and they need to have a legal agreement. I look at it more of, I shouldn't have to necessarily like expire or re-up someone, because I should be engaging with them as the program leader. So I should know exactly where they stand. I should know exactly how active they are, what they have going on in their life. Did they have a baby recently? Did they, you know, grow their family? Are they getting married? Like those types of things, which we all know can be timelines in our life that like don't allow us to be as strong of an ambassador as we might be in other times. And so I like to just kind of like do a very like passive situation where it's like, hey, you've got a lot going on. It doesn't mean that we don't engage them, right? We still send them emails, we still share things with them, up until the point that they're like, yep, we're no longer interested. But behind the scenes, I've got different rankings for my ambassadors. How active are they versus the less active? And so when I get really, really, really great opportunities that are just like amazing thought leadership, connections, providing huge values, then I will surface those with my like higher level ambassadors and kind of bring that down the pipeline. So it really comes back to like, how much are you giving back? And like, let's make sure that we're giving back equal or just as much or more, right? Usually more actually, back to those ambassadors. So I've got lots of feedback on this, but I think that's a pretty good summary.
I love that, Tessa. Thank you. And it sounds like you have some pretty impressive sort of like engagement scoring happening in the background there that helps inform how you're kind of incentivizing and rewarding your ambassadors. Sarah, I'd love to learn a little bit more about your kind of structure, if there's kind of any contracting or if there's any type of scoring that you're doing, Sarah, for your ambassador, and how that ties to rewarding.
Yeah, it's very tricky for me, especially on the worldwide level, because we have a very large community, right? And to be honest, every single one of them can be an ambassador, even though they do not have an official role as an ambassador, right? So many alumni just talk about JA because they love JA, and we never gave them an official role, right? That's great. So what I 100% agree with you, Tessa, on like the actual like scoring in the back, kind of like giving them the opportunity to like get access to like cooler things. However, what we recommend is that the alumni ambassadors do that on the local level, right? Because the question of quality versus quantity is also very big, because JA reaches so many students, so the pressure is high to get a lot of engaged alumni, right? But obviously then the bigger the community is, the harder it is to actually track every single one of them. I'm trying hard to like remember the names and knowing all of them, but you know, there's only so much you can do. So actually, on the local level, yes. So if you have a smaller community, 100% do that. Some of our alumni networks, for example, here in Austria, they actually have point systems, right? And then with every point, so if you do something voluntary, whatever, you get a point, and then you can have whatever. If you have 100 points, you get a conference ticket. Just an example, right? So what we do on the global level is more like really making sure that we have like a set job title and a set, actually, this is your specific role, right? Because again, diversity, people from different cultures, people understand things differently. You have to be very clear, very specific, and very, hey, this is what is expected, and this is what actually worked really well on the global level. So it depends on how big your community is, what you want to get out of it. And especially we at JWill, we're big in the advocacy space, right? So we need to make sure that people actually deliver on what we need them to deliver at the end of the day, right? Because we have great partners and big partners, so we can't let them down. So big community, very clear instructions, guidelines on like 1 year terms or half-year terms or project-based terms, what works really well. However, on the local level, it can be much more on the like ongoing, like fluid things, because if you have a giant community to follow up with every single one, it's not, you know, there's one human at JWill, which is me, who does that right now. So it's close to impossible to actually get track of that. But, you know, it's an ongoing process. I would love to get a score for every single human, but it's just not even realistic, actually.
I love that, because like it goes back again to what we were talking about before in terms of understanding those specific personas and being focused. And so you could have that mix of both, where depending on who you are in the community, you have that ongoing relationship versus an ambassador who has a very structured and functional role that's clear and outlined. So I love that there's different perspectives for different communities. Even within your community, it can be unique. I see here we're almost at time, which means we have maybe room for one more question and parting word with the question. So I really like this one question about, if you had to choose one of your favorite engagement tactics, either for the community or ambassadors, what would that be? I think that's a really fun question to end on. So I don't know who'd like to go first, Tess or Sarah, but if you had to pick your favorite engagement kind of tactic, what would it be? And hit us with a parting word.
I can start. I think, don't just talk about it, actually do it and lead by example. This probably applies to every single thing you do in life, but building a global community, if you are not like the #1 human who believes in diversity, inclusion, and into these young people at JA, it's not going to work, right? I've been through it, and I'm probably the biggest ambassador for alumni community, and I'll fight them in every board meeting. If, you know, like other people have different opinions, I'll be the voice for, you know, speaking up with them and really believing in the community you're building. If you do not believe in the community you're building, it's not going to work, because you're not authentic. It's, people will notice, and it just works because it's a lot of emotion as well, right? My job is also partly like, you know, private life, whatever. My best friends are from the alumni network, actually, so this is how far it goes. But believe in the community you're building, otherwise it's really not going to work.
Thank you, Sarah. Tessa, your favorite engagement and a parting word?
Yes. Oh, this is like so hard because I love so many of them. Like, I love people. And obviously, I think when we get into community, right, that's why we're there. We love people. We love helping people. We love like elevating people. And so I can relate to that so deeply. So honestly, I think my favorite engagement tactic is being able to have conversations, either one-to-one with ambassadors when that is something that I can do, or when it's like at an event and we're in person. So whether or not we're like hanging out at a conference, or if we're doing a happy hour, or like probably one of my favorites is like when you go to like arcade bars and it's like, yes, let's play video games together and like nerd out and just enjoy life together, right? And so whether that be virtual or online, I think that tends to be mine, is like when I can bring those folks together as a big group. Not always like the easiest way to drive engagement, but definitely my favorite. Then for parting words, like honestly, like I think I've really shared a lot. I shared some of my links in the chat, so if you've got any questions, like feel free to reach out. I know we're at time, but in terms of parting words, like I truly, I cannot echo this enough, how important ambassador programs are, especially with the developer community, just due to the trust building that it requires. And so when you can have like cheerleaders on the ground that are like echoing what you're doing in the most authentic way, I think that's when you really can truly win and like bring all the joy of your lovely community out into the world to share with others. So that's probably my parting words.
Thank you. So we are definitely at time. I want to thank you both so much for joining us. Thanks everyone for all of the questions and for being with us here today. Sarah and Tessa, again, your thoughts, your insights, your expertise, valuable for our discussion. Thank you. To our audience, we're going to be sharing a recording of this webinar by email. So if you have any other questions, hit reply to that email and let us know. And we're going to drop a quick survey link here in the chat. We'd love to have your feedback. As we're saying, listen to your audience. So please give us that feedback so we can make more engaging programming for you in the future. And again, thank you to everyone. Thank you, Tessa. Thank you, Sarah. And we'll talk again soon. Ciao. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks for being an amazing host.
Everyone.
Thank you. Bye.